You ask
Okay,
your child
Leo,
to do
time to
something.
tidy up.
They do the opposite.
We
You
need to
repeat
clean up for
yourself.
real this
Nothing
time. We need to
changes.
clean up
And
now.
after a while, a question
Why
starts
won't
to
my
take
child
over.
listen to
Why
me?
won't my child listen to me? Because from the outside, it looks like stubbornness. It looks like defiance. Sometimes it even feels like they deliberately chose to do the exact opposite. But what if part of this behavior doesn't start with a decision to disobey? What if the real struggle begins before that decision is ever made? Because there's one detail that almost nobody notices. Behavior doesn't always begin where adults think it does. And once you understand that, the question changes from, why won't my child listen? What's preventing them from doing what I asked? When a child doesn't do what's been asked, the explanation usually comes quickly. He's stubborn. She's testing boundaries. He always wants things his own way. But there's a problem with that explanation. It doesn't explain why the same child cooperates easily in some situations and resists in others. And here's the detail almost nobody notices. Following directions isn't just about hearing. The brain has to stop one activity, shift attention, and start a new one. All of that happens within seconds. And when one of those steps breaks down, the result looks exactly the same. The child doesn't do what was asked, but the reason behind it may be very different from what adults imagine. Now, think about a common situation. Your child is playing, completely absorbed. Then you say, "It's time to go. Put that away. Time for a bath." Sounds simple, but for a child's brain, it's not just about hearing the request. It's about leaving one activity and switching to another. And that transition is much harder than it seems, especially for younger children. That's why resistance often shows up during transitions. And here's the detail that changes everything. Many times, the struggle starts before the response parents actually see, because from the outside, it looks like he doesn't want to listen. But on the inside, it may sound more like, "I haven't finished leaving what I was doing yet." Now think about another everyday moment. You say, "Clean up your toys. We need to leave. Time for a bath." To you, the priority is obvious, but to your child, it may not be. Because a child's brain doesn't organize priorities the way an adult brain does. In that moment, the game, the discovery, or the imaginary world they're creating may feel far more important than your instruction. And here's the detail that changes everything. Often, the resistance isn't about the rule. It's about the interruption. That's why many children cooperate much better when they're given a few minutes to prepare. Because the problem isn't always what comes next. It's having to let go of what's happening right now. There's another important detail happening at the same time. Many children are discovering something new, that they have a will of their own. That's why the famous "no" shows up so often. Not always because they're trying to challenge their parents, but because the brain is experimenting with autonomy, and that creates an invisible conflict. On one side, following directions. On the other, feeling like they still have some control over their own experience. And that may be exactly why small choices work so well. Do you want to put away the blocks or the cars first? Suddenly the resistance starts to fade, not because the rule changed, but because the brain no longer feels like it lost all control. And once you understand that, disobedience starts to look less like defiance and more like development happening in real time. And this is where many struggles begin to grow, because the more the child resists, the more the adult pushes. And the more the adult pushes, the more the child resists. Without realizing it, both sides get pulled into a cycle. You raise your voice. The child pushes back. You repeat the instruction. They shut down even more. And suddenly, something that started with a simple, "Let's clean up the toys," turns into an emotional battle. But here's the detail almost nobody notices. When a child's brain shifts into defense mode, cooperation usually decreases, because the focus is no longer the task. It's the conflict. That's why some children become even more resistant when the pressure increases. Not because they're trying to win, but because their brain is busy protecting its sense of control. And that explains why some strategies work far better than repeating the same instruction 10 times. And this may be one of the most important discoveries in this entire video. Many times the solution isn't increasing pressure, it's increasing predictability. Because a child's brain cooperates better when it knows what's coming next. That's why warnings often work better than sudden transitions. In 5 minutes, we're leaving. After this game, it's bath time. Suddenly, the transition no longer feels like an interruption. It feels like something the brain was already expecting. Another thing that helps tremendously is connection before correction, because children tend to cooperate more when they feel emotionally connected in that moment. And there's a third detail that can make a big difference. Small choices. Not choices about the rule itself, but choices within the rule. Do you want the blue pajamas or the red ones? Do you want to put away the blocks or the cars first? It sounds simple, but it reduces the feeling of losing all control. And when that happens, resistance often decreases, because the goal isn't just getting obedience, it's helping the brain cooperate. And if all of this could be translated into something your child might say, it might sound like this. I heard you. I just couldn't switch gears as quickly as you expected. Sometimes I'm still mentally stuck in what I was doing. I want to feel like I have some choice too. I'm still learning how to control my impulses. I'm not trying to make your life harder. I'm trying to do all of this while my brain is still learning. And that may be exactly what adults rarely get to see, because behavior shows up on the outside, but the process happens on the inside. And when you put everything we've talked about together, something starts to become clear. Maybe the biggest mistake is assuming that every act of disobedience comes from a desire to challenge parents, because many times, what looks like disobedience on the outside is actually development happening on the inside. Sometimes it's difficulty stopping an activity. Sometimes it's a growing need for autonomy. Sometimes it's a brain that's still learning flexibility and self-regulation, and that completely changes how you interpret the behavior. Because in many cases, your child isn't fighting against you. They're trying to manage abilities that are still under construction. And once that clicks, many situations stop looking like confrontations and start making sense. And there's something interesting about all of this. Many of the children who seem the most defiant in certain situations are also the ones who struggle the most when they lose their sense of safety and predictability. And one place where this becomes especially obvious is a behavior that worries many parents: fear of the dark. Because for a child's brain, darkness isn't just the absence of light. It can feel like the absence of information, the absence of predictability, the absence of control. So click on the video that's on your screen right now. You'll discover why some children are so afraid of the dark and what their brain is actually trying to do in those moments. I'll see you there.